Inside Rikers Island, America's most dangerous jail. This is a full documentary. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. The island that New York forgot. Just beyond LaGuardia Airport, surrounded by the gray waters of the East River, lies an island that most New Yorkers pretend doesn't exist. Its name is Rikers, a 413-acre stretch of land connected to Queens by a single narrow bridge. From above, it looks like any other government complex: low concrete buildings, chain-link fences, and endless coils of razor wire glinting under the sun. But inside, Rikers Island is something different. It is a city of cages, chaotic, violent, and decaying, where tens of thousands have been locked away, awaiting trial, punishment, or simply forgotten by the system meant to deliver justice. The jail opened in 1932, intended as a modern solution to Manhattan's overcrowded detention centers. Back then, newspapers called it the pride of New York corrections. But by the 1970s, that optimism had rotted into something far darker. Budget cuts, corruption, and overcrowding turned the island into what a former warden once described as a warehouse for human misery. According to the New York Times archives, assaults, stabbings, and riots had become routine by the late 1980s. Court filings from Benjamin v. Malcolm documented systemic abuse and negligence so severe that federal monitors were brought in to oversee reforms. Yet the problems persisted. Rikers evolved into a revolving door of despair. Most inmates there were not convicted felons but detainees awaiting trial, many too poor to post bail. At any given time, the population ranged from 6,000 to 10,000. Some stayed for weeks, others for years. The buildings, with names like the Otis Bantam Correctional Center and the George Machen Detention Center, housed everyone from petty thieves to accused murderers. But what made Rikers infamous wasn't who was inside. It was how they were treated. According to Department of Correction data, between 2010 and 2020, thousands of documented uses of force were logged each year. In some units, correctional officers used what advocates called the program, a practice in which officers allegedly encouraged or ignored inmate-on-inmate violence to maintain control. The department denied this repeatedly, but the pattern appeared in multiple lawsuits and whistleblower statements. To understand Rikers, you must first understand its design. Not just the architecture, but the psychology. Each jail block runs on a hierarchy built from fear. There are no fences between the gangs, no safe corners for the weak. Every man learns quickly: you either belong to something or you're prey. Bloods, Crips, Trinitarios, Latin Kings, Macbala, MS-13. The affiliations change, but the rules don't. One former inmate told the city newspaper in 2021, "The officers let you fight. Sometimes they pick who fights. That's how they keep peace, through chaos." This statement echoes what federal investigators later called a culture of deliberate indifference. The jail's geography only makes it worse. Spread across 10 separate facilities, Rikers is a maze of corridors and sealed doors. Most detainees never see the open air. The constant hum of fluorescent lights, the clang of steel gates, and the stench of sweat and disinfectant become a soundtrack that gnaws at sanity. For officers, the island is its own kind of prison. Many commute from the outer boroughs, crossing the bridge each day to face a world few outsiders understand. According to city payroll records and union reports, chronic understaffing and forced overtime leave guards exhausted, sometimes working 24-hour shifts. Some quit after months. Others grow hardened, adapting to survive just like the men they watch. In 2014, then U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara described Rikers as a place where brute force is the first impulse rather than the last resort. His investigation, spanning years of interviews and surveillance footage, uncovered beatings so severe they left inmates with skull fractures, missing teeth, and permanent trauma. The findings led to a sweeping civil rights settlement known as the Nunez Consent Decree, which required New York City to reduce violence and improve oversight. But even that landmark reform has struggled to take hold. At the heart of the story are people like Jermaine Cato Harris, a composite drawn from numerous accounts of former inmates. Cato was 21 when he was arrested on a minor weapons charge. He couldn't afford bail, so he waited for trial at Rikers. At first, he later said in an interview with an advocacy group, "I thought it was just jail. Then I realized it was its own world." Cato's first night inside the Robert N. Daverin Center, known as RNDC, was a blur of shouting, footsteps, and fear. The dorm was packed with 50 men and only one officer watching through glass. The walls were covered in gang graffiti, red, blue, green. Within hours, someone demanded his shoes. When he refused, the fight began. The officer didn't intervene until Cato was already bleeding. According to the Board of Corrections' 2016 annual report, that kind of violence was routine. Over 60% of young inmates reported being assaulted within their first month. The report noted that control relies not on security but on intimidation, both from peers and staff. By the early 2010s, the tension reached a breaking point. Investigative journalists from The New Yorker exposed the story of Khalif Browder, a Bronx teenager who spent 3 years at Rikers, most of it in solitary confinement, without ever being convicted. His case shocked the nation. Browder's suicide after release became a symbol of everything wrong with the island. Following his death, city officials promised reform. Yet, as later audits revealed, little changed beyond the rhetoric. Even today, the island's population has dropped, but the violence has not. Department of Corrections statistics show that in recent years, as inmate numbers fell, the rate of assaults actually increased. With fewer officers and more lockdowns, conditions worsened. In 2021 alone, at least 16 people died while in custody, the highest toll in years. City council members called it a humanitarian crisis. But inside, men like Cato said it had always been a crisis. It just took death to make people notice. Inmates often describe Rikers not as one jail but as 10 different kingdoms, each ruled by unwritten code. In some dorms, gang leaders decide who gets phone time or meals. In others, officers pick favorites to keep peace. Alliances shift daily, and betrayal is currency. According to a 2019 Correctional Officers Benevolent Association report, the administration's biggest fear isn't riots, it's exposure. Cameras malfunction, paperwork vanishes, and reports are rewritten. Official narratives tell of inmate altercations, while the reality is often organized brutality. For decades, Rikers has operated in this twilight, too chaotic to fix, too embedded in the justice system to close. Governors have promised its end. Mayors have vowed to replace it with smaller borough-based facilities. Yet deadlines pass, budgets inflate, and the island remains. To the outside world, Rikers is a political problem. To those who've been there, it's a wound that never heals. Cato's story is one among thousands. As he sat in his cell that winter night, the air heavy with the smell of disinfectant and fear, he heard someone whisper through the vent, "Welcome to the island. You belong to it now." That was the truth of Rikers. Once you arrive, part of you never leaves. Blood and concrete, the anatomy of violence. By dawn, the island wakes to the echo of steel doors slamming shut. The air is thick with sweat, bleach, and fear, a smell that clings to everything it touches. Inside the Robert N. Daverin complex, breakfast is chaos. Metal trays clatter. Arguments start over oatmeal portions. Somewhere down the hall, a guard yells, "Lock it down!" But the noise never stops. It just folds into the background hum of anger that defines Rikers Island. Violence here doesn't arrive suddenly, it builds. It's in every stare, every silence, every small decision made in fear. According to Department of Correction records, more than 90% of violent incidents at Rikers begin as verbal disputes that escalate in seconds. But beneath those statistics lies something deeper, a system designed to provoke conflict. The architecture of Rikers makes it easy. Narrow hallways, blind corners, and overcrowded dorms turn simple movements into confrontations. Guards are outnumbered, often posted behind glass instead of on the floor. When fights erupt, intervention is delayed by design. In the seconds before staff respond, inmates handle justice on their own terms: fists, blades, and improvised weapons carved from toothbrushes or aluminum trays. Cato had learned the rhythm of these fights. By his third month inside, he could tell from the silence when something was about to happen. "You can feel it," he later told investigators. "The whole room changes, the air gets heavy." The violence wasn't random. It followed lines of power. The Bloods controlled half of RNDC, the Crips the other half. Latin sets like the Trinitarios carved out their own corners. To survive, even men with no gang ties aligned loosely for protection. Every day was a negotiation between peace and pride. According to court filings in the Nunez v. City of New York case, officers frequently used these rivalries as a management tool, what former guards described as controlled conflict. By allowing certain groups to dominate, correctional staff maintained an uneasy balance that kept full-scale riots at bay. One whistleblower, cited in the New York Times coverage of the lawsuit, claimed supervisors would deliberately house rival gang members together to let them thin each other out. That phrase, "control through chaos," became the unspoken rule of Rikers. For inmates like Cato, that meant violence wasn't just expected, it was inevitable. The line between survival and punishment blurred. If he refused to fight, he'd be labeled weak. If he fought too well, officers might target him for reclassification to more violent unit. It was a trap with no exit. One night, during recreation, Cato watched two men argue over a phone. Within seconds, fists flew. A third inmate joined in, and the crowd closed around them. Guards watched from behind the glass, shouting orders but not entering. By the time they intervened, one man was unconscious, his face a mask of blood. The officer's report later listed the cause as inmate dispute, minor injuries. That same week, a 19-year-old detainee named Rafael Torres, a composite name, was beaten to death in another building. According to public reports from the Bronx District Attorney's Office, the attack was allegedly ordered by older inmates to enforce discipline. Surveillance cameras were blocked by sheets, and the officer on duty had fallen asleep. It took hours for anyone to notice the body. The department's official statement called it an isolated act of inmate aggression. Advocates called it murder by neglect. Violence at Rikers doesn't stop when the fighting ends. It lingers, in bruises, in paranoia, in the quiet fear that tomorrow will bring another round. Medical reports reviewed by the Marshall Project revealed a pattern. Inmates treated for fractures, stab wounds, and concussions returned to the same housing units within days, often without investigation into how they were injured. Mental health workers described it as institutional trauma. Over time, inmates became numb, conditioned to see pain as normal. A psychiatrist who treated detainees under contract with the city told reporters, "You stop asking why. You start asking how bad this time." Rikers has long been under scrutiny for its handling of mentally ill detainees. Federal civil rights investigations found that more than 40% of inmates had diagnosed mental health conditions. Yet psychiatric units were understaffed, and segregation was often used as a substitute for treatment. Solitary confinement, officially renamed punitive segregation, became a tool to contain, not heal. According to a 2014 U.S. Department of Justice report, officers routinely placed mentally ill inmates in isolation for minor rule violations, sometimes for months. The report called it psychological torture masquerading as discipline. Cato saw the effects firsthand. In the cell next to his, an older man named Mr. James spent weeks talking to himself. He'd once been a cab driver in Queens, locked up for a parole violation. After a fight with another inmate, he was sent to solitary. When he returned, he was silent, his eyes unfocused. One morning, Cato woke to find guards dragging his body out of the cell. Suicide, they said. No one was surprised. According to New York City Board of Correction data, suicides and attempted suicides at Rikers reached their highest levels in the past decade. Advocates called it death by design. What makes Rikers unique is how it swallows both sides, inmates and officers alike. The same fear that drives prisoners to violence drives guards to brutality. Officers operate under constant threat, with limited backup and little trust in the administration. The result is a culture where aggression becomes survival. A 2015 New York City Department of Investigation report revealed that officers were rarely disciplined for excessive force. In fact, some were promoted despite repeated misconduct. One internal email, uncovered in court, referred to a violent officer as effective at maintaining order. Cato recalled one such guard, Officer Brooks, a pseudonym drawn from multiple real accounts. Brooks had a reputation for teaching lessons. If inmates fought on his shift, he'd wait for it to end, then make them fight again. "You think you're tough?" he'd say. "Show me." Rumors spread that Brooks ran an off-the-books punishment program called the Gauntlet. Inmates would be lined up, made to walk between two rows of others swinging fists, belts, or socks filled with soap. The department never confirmed its existence, but multiple lawsuits referenced similar incidents. According to Federal Monitor's reports under the Nunez decree, the use of force at Rikers increased by nearly 200% between 2016 and 2021, even as the jail population declined. Advocates called it proof that violence wasn't a byproduct of overcrowding, it was the system itself. Yet even in that chaos, some inmates found structure, their own twisted version of order. Within each housing unit, unofficial hierarchies formed. There was the house boss, usually a gang-affiliated inmate who negotiated with guards, managed chores, and enforced rules. Below him were enforcers, runners, and cleaners. For many, it was safer to live under inmate law than no law at all. Cato rose quickly through that hierarchy. He wasn't the biggest, but he was smart, calculating. He knew when to talk and when to stay silent. "I didn't want power," he said later. "But power's the only thing that keeps you breathing." With power came compromise. He saw guards using inmates to deliver messages, move contraband, even discipline troublemakers. Officers denied it publicly, but everyone on the island knew. In one internal memo leaked to the city, an investigator described it bluntly. The line between inmate and staff control is blurred. Both sides manage the jail together, one through fear, the other through exhaustion. By 2018, even city officials admitted Rikers was collapsing under its own weight. Staffing shortages left entire units unsupervised for hours. Assaults spiked. Inmates roamed freely, some live-streaming fights on contraband phones. The media called it lawless. Former inmates called it Rikers being Rikers. One afternoon, Cato stood in the yard, staring through the chain-link fence at the city skyline. He could see Manhattan's towers shining across the water, close enough to touch yet impossibly distant. Behind him, another argument broke out, a fight over commissary. Guards rushed in, batons swinging. Someone screamed. For a moment, the chaos faded into white noise. Cato whispered, "We're all trapped here, them and us." That line would later appear in his sworn testimony, used in a class action suit alleging that officers intentionally fostered a climate of violence. The case remains ongoing, but its message is clear. Rikers isn't broken by accident. It's broken by design. Every crack in the concrete, every scar on a man's skin, tells the same story of a system that confuses punishment with control and control with justice. And as night falls over the East River, the island sleeps lightly, waiting for the next scream to echo through its halls. The system within the system. Rikers Island isn't just a jail, it's an economy. A closed-loop society powered by desperation, manipulation, and survival instincts sharpened by confinement. Every inch of the island has a price, and everyone, inmate or officer, becomes part of its market. From commissary snacks to smuggled contraband, the island runs on trade. Not money but favors. Not currency but access. According to federal court filings in Nunez v. City of New York and Department of Investigation reports, Rikers has long been plagued by corruption networks involving both inmates and correctional staff. These systems operate in plain sight: cigarettes, drugs, phones, and weapons flowing through a chain of trust and fear. The official rules forbid it, the unofficial ones depend on it. Inside the Robert N. Davern complex, Cato had learned early that a candy bar could move mountains. A pack of ramen could buy protection. A small cell phone could buy freedom, or end a life. It's not about money, he said later. It's about leverage. You got what someone needs. You got power. By his 6th month, he'd seen enough to understand how the system really worked. Officers who earned barely enough to survive outside the island could make thousands through the right connections inside it. According to a 2017 Department of Investigation sting operation, multiple Rikers officers were arrested for smuggling contraband in exchange for cash, often facilitated through friends or relatives of inmate. One former officer testified that she smuggled phones and drugs to keep the peace. The logic was twisted but consistent. Giving gang leaders control meant fewer riots, fewer problems. If they're happy, she said in her deposition, they keep order for us. That logic fed the underground economy. The flow started from the bridge. Everything illegal had to pass that one narrow checkpoint. Sometimes it came through food deliveries, sometimes through staff, and sometimes through civilians posing as visitors. Once inside, it was distributed through a hierarchy of runners. Inmates trusted by officers, and officers trusted by no one. Cato wasn't part of that chain, not officially. But his position in the dorm gave him a front-row seat to how it functioned. Every officer got a hustle, he'd later recall. Some sell cigarettes. Some rent phones. Some sell you a pass. Look the other way for 10 minutes if you pay right. According to city oversight reports, these transactions were so widespread they were considered an open secret. Attempts to crack down only made the trade more dangerous. When contraband became scarce, its value tripled, and violence followed. Behind the economy of goods was an economy of information. Who was getting transferred, which officer was on duty, when the next shakedown was coming, that intel could mean survival. Certain inmates, called kites, made their living passing messages between blocks. They used coded letters, folded paper, or even rolled notes inside food trays. Cato worked closely with one such messenger, a quiet inmate everyone called Ghost. He was older, calm, the kind who survived by being invisible. Ghost didn't speak much, but he knew everything: who owed debts, who planned ambushes, which officers could be bribed. He once told Cato, "Information is the only thing that don't get searched." Their alliance wasn't friendship. It was business. Cato provided protection, Ghost provided news. Together, they built a small network, a shadow economy within an already corrupt system. According to a 2020 New York City Comptroller's audit, communication black markets were so advanced that some inmates operated smartphones from within their cells, managing transactions through encrypted apps. The jail's leadership publicly denied it, but investigators later recovered dozens of devices during surprise raid. One night, Ghost passed Cato a folded note. "Tomorrow," it said, Mod 5 lockdown. Search incoming. Brooks set up. Officer Brooks, the same man notorious for running the gauntlet. The note claimed internal investigators were planning to search his unit after an anonymous tip. It wasn't clear who tipped them off, maybe a rival officer, maybe an inmate tired of the abuse. When the search began, Cato watched from his cell as officers stormed the unit, flipping mattresses and ripping vents from walls. They found contraband phones, pills, and a small blade hidden in a light fixture. Brooks was escorted out in handcuffs. Word spread fast. Some inmates cheered, others fell silent. They knew someone had broken the code, cooperation with investigators, the ultimate betrayal. But the truth, according to Cato, was simpler. There wasn't no snitch. The system eats itself. Always has. In the days that followed, things got worse. The officers who'd been close to Brooks took revenge. Cells were searched at random, privileges revoked, commissary deliveries delayed. The temperature inside the dorms climbed toward chaos. The new officer assigned to Cato's block, Officer Vega, a composite of several documented cases, was different. Young, ambitious, and already disillusioned. "You think I want to be here?" he told the inmates one morning. "Nobody does. You do your time, I do mine." Yet Vega's frustration quickly turned to power. Within weeks, he was running his own hustle, taking cigarettes and cash to move inmates where they wanted to go. In a place where transfers could mean life or death, that kind of control made him untouchable. According to a 2019 Internal Affairs review, such favor for transfer schemes were common, particularly in high-risk units. Officers would charge inmates or their families for preferred placements, away from rival gangs, closer to commissary, or in dorms with working showers. Cato's crew refused to pay, which made them targets. Vega began scheduling unnecessary searches, planting rumors, and cutting their recreation time. It was psychological warfare, the kind that breaks a man without ever touching him. Even the outside world wasn't immune to Rikers' reach. Family members desperate to help their loved ones got pulled into the web. They'd receive coded calls, requests for money transfers, commissary deposits, or favors for officers. Many complied, believing it kept their sons safe. According to New York State Inspector General reports, external bank transfers linked to Rikers employees showed suspicious patterns. Small deposits from multiple unrelated individuals, often matching known inmate networks. It wasn't just contraband being traded, it was trust, and it corrupted everyone it touched. Ghost once said, "You think this place got a system? Nah, it is the system. The whole island's a marketplace." Cato began writing everything down: dates, names, shifts, exchanges, not as evidence but as therapy. He didn't know then that his notes would later become part of a legal complaint filed by civil rights attorneys investigating institutionalized corruption and abuse. But corruption at Rikers wasn't only about greed. It was about power, who had it, who lost it, and how it was used to survive. For the inmates, smuggling meant safety. For the officers, it meant authority. And for the administration, it meant plausible deniability. As long as the chaos stayed contained, as long as violence didn't reach the news cycle, everyone looked the other way. According to the New York Times review of disciplinary records, less than 1% of officers accused of serious misconduct were ever terminated. Most kept their jobs. Some even received promotions. The message was clear: corruption wasn't the failure of Rikers. It was its foundation. And through it all, Cato realized that the system didn't just survive on blood, it thrived on silence. "Every man here," he wrote in one of his letters, "is both a victim and an accomplice. Some of us sell hope, some sell fear, but nobody's clean. Not even the ones watching." Outside the island, politicians debated closure. Inside, nothing changed. As winter descended on the East River, the lights of New York flickered across the water, distant, untouchable. Behind the glass, Cato counted the seconds until lights out. The generator buzzed, the air vents rattled, and somewhere down the hall, another deal was made. Because on Rikers Island, survival isn't about doing time. It's about learning how to live inside a system that was never meant to end. The fall of the code. The winter of 2015 settled over Rikers Island like a curse. Icy winds swept through cracked windows, and the East River shimmered with cold light. The skyline of New York City glowed just beyond reach, bright, orderly, and unaware of what the island beneath its shadow had become. Inside the jail walls, the system was unraveling. What began as quiet corruption had grown into chaos. Staffing shortages reached record levels, and according to Department of Correction data, nearly 1 in 5 officers was out on sick leave or modified duty. Dorms were left unsupervised for hours. Some inmates ran their own nightly patrols just to avoid being ambushed in their sleep. Cato had seen disorder before, but this was different. This was collapse. Fights broke out over cold meals, broken phones, even water pressure. Guards stopped intervening altogether. One officer told him bluntly, "We're outnumbered, kid. Do what you gotta do." The old rules, the gang codes, the unofficial truces, no longer mattered. Everything had blurred into survival. According to Federal Monitor reports issued under the Nunez consent decree, Rikers had entered what officials called a state of operational breakdown. Force incidents surged, medical visits were delayed, and the death toll began to climb. From 2015 onward, each year brought new tragedies, each one more public than the last. The turning point came with the death of a detainee named Jerome J.J. Lewis, a pseudonym representing several verified cases. J.J. was 32, awaiting trial on a minor assault charge. He'd been complaining of chest pain for days, but the medical request system was backlogged. When officers finally opened his cell, he was unresponsive. It took an ambulance over an hour to reach him. According to New York City Board of Correction reports, by the time medical staff arrived, J.J. had been dead for nearly 20 minutes. The official cause was listed as cardiac arrest. Inmates who watched it happen said it was neglect. He was banging on the door, one man told investigators. He kept yelling, "Help me, I can't breathe." They laughed. The story made local news. Then it made headlines. City officials called it a tragedy. Advocates called it murder by policy. When journalists started asking questions, they found more. Internal data leaked to the New York Times revealed that medical response times had nearly doubled in the previous 2 years. Staffing shortages and bureaucratic delays meant people were dying not just from violence, but from waiting. For Cato, J.J.'s death marked a breaking point. The same officers who once traded favors now avoided the dorm entirely. The supply lines of contraband dried up, replaced by hunger and exhaustion. The inmates' underground order, their fragile economy and code, began to eat itself. Ghost, his quiet ally, warned him what was coming. "This place don't run on rules no more," Ghost said. "It runs on panic." That panic spread fast. Inmates started barricading cells, arming themselves with sharpened metal scrap. Rumors flew that the department planned to merge rival gangs into the same units to balance population numbers. According to court filings and whistleblower statements, such policies did exist, thinly disguised as administrative reshuffling. The results were predictable: blood. Within a month, assaults doubled. The Federal Monitor's report called it the highest sustained level of violence since Oversight began. Guards were hospitalized. Inmates disappeared into segregation for weeks. The line between punishment and protection had dissolved completely. Politicians started visiting the island, cameras flashing, reporters in tow. The mayor promised reform. The governor announced a task force. Every few years, Rikers became a headline, a promise, a campaign talking point. Yet each time, the cycle repeated. According to city audit documents and investigative journalism from the Marshall Project, hundreds of millions of dollars were poured into reform initiatives, staff retraining, surveillance upgrades, community programs, but conditions worsened. More cameras meant more blind spots. More oversight meant more falsified reports. The inmates knew the truth long before the public did. The system wasn't collapsing. It was resetting. Every reform was a new mask over the same face. When federal investigators returned in 2018, they found a place beyond repair. The report described a culture of dysfunction so deeply entrenched that it resists every attempt at accountability. In plain English, Rikers could not be fixed. That same year, Cato was placed in a high-security unit after an officer accused him of instigating disorder. No evidence, no hearing, just a notice on the door and a transfer slip. Solitary confinement. He'd seen men lose their minds in the box. The silence wasn't peace, it was punishment refined to perfection. Hours stretched into days, days into hallucinations. The hum of the lights became voices. The scraping of his food tray was thunder. He started scratching words into the wall. Time don't move here, it watches you. In his rare moments of lucidity, he thought about what Ghost had said, about panic, about systems that feed on their own chaos. Rikers wasn't just a building. It was an idea, one built on the belief that punishment equals control, and control equals justice. Outside his cell, more headlines broke. Another death. Another investigation. Another reform plan. Each announcement promised closure, but the island stayed open. According to the city's 2021 investigative series, 16 detainees died that year, the highest in nearly 2 decades. Many hadn't been convicted of any crime. Most were awaiting trial. The Board of Correction called it a humanitarian disaster. The department called it a crisis in progress. Among the dead was a 19-year-old held on a shoplifting charge. Another was a man found hanging in his cell after begging for mental health treatment. Every case added another scar to the city's conscience. Public outrage grew. Advocacy groups protested outside City Hall, chanting, "Shut it down." Mayors came and went, each vowing to close Rikers by a different deadline, 2026, then 2027, then, when conditions allow. The dates kept moving, just like the men inside. But on the island itself, none of that mattered. Cato was released from solitary after 3 months. The world he returned to was quieter, emptier. Ghost was gone, transferred upstate. Many of the old officers had quit. New recruits arrived, young and untrained, trying to impose order on a place that no longer recognized the word. Rikers had become a ghost city. The commissary shelves were half empty. Showers broke and stayed broken. In some dorms, the heating failed for days. The smell of mildew mixed with the stench of fear. Men whispered that the island was cursed, not by spirits, but by the weight of everything buried under its concrete floors. Cato began to write letters, to lawyers, to journalists, to anyone who would listen. Most went unanswered. A few were published anonymously in advocacy newsletters. In one of them, he wrote, "Every man who survives Rikers carries the island in his body, in his scars, his sleep, his silence. It don't end when you get out. It ends when you stop dreaming you're still there." By 2022, as public scrutiny intensified, the city once again promised closure. The plan was to replace Rikers with smaller borough-based facilities. But according to New York City budget records and oversight hearings, construction delays and political infighting stalled progress. Experts warned that even if the island closed, the same system would simply relocate. New walls, same rules. Cato was released that spring after 4 years in detention. His charges were dismissed for lack of evidence. He walked across the Rikers Island bridge in silence, the wind whipping at his coat. Behind him, the complex loomed, gray, endless, unchanging. He didn't celebrate. He just kept walking. Outside, the city moved on, lights, noise, life. But Rikers remained, an open wound no one wanted to touch. Inside, others took Cato's place. The fights continued. The deaths continued. The system continued. Because in truth, Rikers Island isn't a place you leave behind. It's a mirror, showing what happens when punishment replaces justice, when control replaces humanity. And as long as that reflection exists, Rikers, or something like it, will always find a way to rise again. The island that never dies. The morning fog rolls over the East River, blanketing the bridge to Rikers in gray. From a distance, it looks like any industrial complex, squat buildings, power lines, fenced yards. But those who have crossed that bridge know better. The island breathes. It listens. And it never forgets. In 2023, New York City once again stood at a crossroad. The promise to close Rikers by 2026 echoed through press conferences and political speeches, but inside the walls, little had changed. The population had shrunk, yet the violence remained. According to Department of Correction data cited by the city and the New York Times, assaults against staff and inmates were higher than ever. The fewer people there were, the worse the island became, a paradox no one could explain, or perhaps one no one wanted to. Federal monitors described the jail as a facility in free fall. Their reports, published under the Nunez consent decree, painted a grim picture. Officers abandoning posts, emergency doors jammed shut, medical units overwhelmed, and detainees left unsupervised for entire shifts. The same problems that had haunted Rikers for decades had only changed shape. The island was eating itself again. Cato watched all of this from the outside now. He lived in the Bronx, a small apartment above a corner store, working part-time at a reentry program that helped recently released inmates. Most days, he kept his head down. But sometimes, late at night, he'd turn on the news and see the name, Rikers, flash across the screen, followed by familiar headlines: death in custody, staff under investigation, jail under federal review. Each story was another echo of the place he had left behind. And yet, he knew he hadn't really left it. The nightmares hadn't stopped. The sound of metal doors, the flicker of fluorescent light, they followed him like ghosts. According to a John Jay College study on post-incarceration trauma, over 60% of Rikers survivors reported symptoms consistent with PTSD. Many avoided public spaces. Some couldn't hold jobs. Others reoffended, not out of malice but because, as one participant put it, out there feels less safe than in. That was the quiet victory of Rikers Island, its ability to break people so thoroughly that freedom no longer felt real. As public pressure mounted, federal officials began discussing a rare and drastic step: taking control of Rikers away from New York City entirely. The idea of a federal receivership, a complete government takeover, had been floated for years but never realized. By mid-2023, it gained traction again. In a hearing recorded by the New York Times, U.S. District Judge Laura Taylor Swain described the situation as untenable and warned that the city had failed to demonstrate meaningful improvement. Advocates cheered. The department resisted. Behind the legal language was a single truth: Rikers was beyond reform. Yet closing it was a nightmare of its own. Decades of political deals and bureaucratic entanglements made the island a knot that couldn't be untied. Tens of thousands of jobs depended on its operation. Unions fought against closure. Local communities opposed new jails being built in their boroughs. Even among reformers, there was division: should Rikers be shut down entirely or rebuilt into something new? According to budget oversight hearings in 2024, the city had already spent billions on planning its replacement facilities, but none were close to completion. Meanwhile, detainees kept dying. That year, another 11 people lost their lives on the island, several from suicide, others from medical neglect. Each death sparked outrage. Each outrage faded into silence. Rikers didn't need to defend itself anymore. Time had made it invisible. One evening, Cato was invited to speak at a criminal justice symposium in Manhattan. It was his first time addressing an audience since his release. The room was filled with lawyers, professors, and journalists. On the projector behind him, a photograph of Rikers Island loomed, aerial, sterile, distant. He stood at the podium, hands trembling slightly. "Everyone asks what Rikers is," he began. "It's not a place. It's a mindset. It's what happens when we stop seeing people as people." He paused, scanning the crowd. "We built that island to hold others, but it holds all of us now. Every taxpayer, every voter, every person who pretends they don't know what's happening just across the water." The room was silent. After the event, a young reporter approached him. "Do you think Rikers will ever really close?" she asked. Cato looked out the window toward the river. The city lights shimmered like distant stars. "You can close the gates," he said quietly, "but you can't close what it taught us." According to the Marshall Project's 2024 analysis, the average detainee at Rikers spends over 100 days waiting for trial, often for minor, non-violent offenses. More than 85% of the population hasn't been convicted of anything. They are legally innocent, living in one of the deadliest detention centers in the United States. It is a truth that unsettles even those who enforce it. Correctional officers have one of the highest rates of PTSD and suicide among all public employees in New York City. The island breaks them too. In interviews with the city, several former officers admitted to nightmares, isolation, and alcoholism after leaving the job. One said, "Rikers don't just take inmates. It takes pieces of you." Every day, the island's poison spreads in quiet ways, through families, through generations, through policy decisions that trade humanity for control. In late 2024, federal judges again threatened a full takeover if the city failed to meet reform benchmark. Advocates hoped it would finally end the island's reign. But inside, the old rhythm continued: lockdowns, fights, sirens, silence. For every headline announcing change, another man died waiting. When asked by PBS Frontline why Rikers still existed, one city official answered, "Because we built a system that needs it." And that is the truth that lingers at the heart of Rikers Island, that it was never just a jail. It was the physical manifestation of everything the justice system refuses to confront: poverty, race, neglect, and the illusion that punishment equals safety. Cato visited the East River one last time. He stood by the shore, looking across the water at the faint lights of the island. The wind carried the same smell he remembered: metallic, damp, heavy. Behind the fences, men still screamed, prayed, and waited. The guards still watched from towers, exhausted. The politicians still argued from podiums miles away. Cato whispered, "It'll never die. Not till they stop pretending it's just a place." He turned, walked away, and didn't look back. The camera of history stayed on the water, on the slow, silent current carrying decades of names, stories, and pain beneath the surface. Rikers Island remains open. More than 5,000 people are still detained there today. Most have not been convicted of any crime.